For many of us in the recording trade, Van Gelder might be the most overrated engineer in audio history. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we're going to get into a bit of a controversial topic. And I think before we get into it, I should preface this conversation with my history. Have records here, the name of this channel. I was the vice president of marketing. Late 70s, early 80s, I was hired on to EMI America as a recordist. I worked at the facility off of Santa Monica Boulevard in La Brea in the studio. That was the library that housed all the tape library for EMI, Liberty, United Artists. And as a recordist, orders would come down from Capitol Records. We were owned by Capitol at the time. Orders would come from the tower, and we would go out into the library and compile all the masters, remix the masters. We'd do the best of. I personally worked on, as a recording engineer, I worked on and compiled the best of Kenny Rogers, the best of Sheena Easton, the best of Slim Whitman. That was an interesting project. I worked on a lot of the compilations for the Blue Note Jazz series as well. Mainly with those, I worked in company with my father, Bert Algadello, who was a recording engineer and a mastering engineer, one of the best mastering engineers really in the industry. And if you look under his discography, it's incredible. So we would compile all those things. And actually, we worked with a lot of the recording sessions that Rudy Van Gelder did originally. And before I get into my opinions on how good Rudy was or wasn't, let's get into a little bit of the history of who exactly was Rudy Van Gelder. Rudolf Van Gelder was born November 2nd, 1924, passed away on August 25th of 2016. He was an American recording engineer who specialized in jazz. Over more than half a century, he recorded several thousand sessions, including John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, Sonny Rollins, Art Blakey, Lee Morgan, Joe Henderson, Freddie Hubbard, you name it, all down the industry. Worked with a lot of recording companies, but was mostly closely associated with Blue Note Records. So his career began, really he was not a formally trained recording engineer. He, in the evenings after work, Rudy would do local recording sessions for the local musicians who wanted a 78 RPM recording of their workings. So from 1946, Rudy recorded in his parents' house in Hackensack, New Jersey, in which he built a control room adjacent to the living room, and that served as the musicians' performing area. He himself would honestly say that, you know, he just tried to improve the quality of his playback equipment. In the 50s, Rudy performed engineering and mastering for the classical label Vox Records, and he became a full-time recording engineer in 1959. In 59, he moved the Van Gelder studio that he had in his parents to a larger purpose-built facility in Inglewood Cliffs. I think the thing that we have to understand here is who was Blue Note Records back in those days. Blue Note was competing against the likes of all the major labels. Blue Note was a small label. They were just trying to make it on their own. And what they did is they did a bit of a marketing ploy. Blue Note decided to stamp every one of these Van Gelder sessions with Rudy's personal stamp on it and kind of brand him. I think the thing that we have to understand is back in those days, and we're talking the late 50s, mid 60s, up until when I went to work in the 80s. And we're talking late 70s, early 80s when I worked there. Oftentimes an engineer's name wouldn't even appear on an album. So there are many, many, many things that I worked on. My name never appeared. Same thing goes with my father. Many, many things that he worked on where either his name wouldn't appear or the head engineer at the studio at the time's name would appear, even though they didn't work the session. Music critic Fred Kaplan has argued that Van Gelder's reputation with the record-buying public was aided by Blue Note Records' conspicuous mentions of Van Gelder on their album covers. Kaplan, quote, Van Gelder was hardly the only great jazz engineer on the scene in those days. He may not even have been the best. Other stellar figures included Fred Plott, at Columbia, Roy DeNoonan at Contemporary, Val Valentine at Verve, Roy Goodman at RCA. But the other labels didn't play up their engineers. Columbia covers never so much as mention plot. That's true. While Alfred Lyon, Blue Note's proprietor, promoted Van Gelder's sound as a boutique blend, something of a mystique, and the other labels who hired him followed suit, as if to boast that they too had the special sauce. Van Gelder has also been criticized for his use of compression and high-frequency boosting, both of which, it is argued, compromised the sound. Journalist and radio producer George Hicks wrote, and we're quoting George here, "For many of us in the recording trade, Van Gelder might be the most overrated engineer in audio history. Van Gelder would alter the sounds of the individual instruments and the entire recording with compression, equalization, and reverberation, both as they were being recorded and after." And this is from actually a forum post on stevehoffman.tv. And he goes on, quote, "Take 3 or 4 expensive German mics with a blistering top-end boost, put them real close to the instruments, add some extra distortion from a cheap overloading mic preamp through an Army surplus radio console, put some crappy plate reverb on it, and record. Then immediately, and for no good reason, redub the master onto a Magnatone tape deck at +6, compress the crap out of it while adding 5 dB at 5,000 cycles to everything. That's the Van Gelder sound to me." I got to tell you, that's harsh criticism, but I kind of I have to concur with him on that one. I think if you really look at it, you'll see he really used a lot of compression. It was highly compressed, which didn't need to be if it was recorded correctly in the first place. But again, that Van Gelder sound became popular and now is highly sought after. I have more than one Van Gelder pressing in the collection. They're available for sale as well. That's my opinion, that they created a certain sound. From an engineering standpoint, it could have been better, but it is what it is. So we'll leave it at that. I know you're many fans. I want to hear your comments as well as what you think of the Van Gelder sound. We'll continue on and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks.